Hey everyone, my name is Jesse, and these are my dogs, Maya and Audrey. We are currently living in San Antonio, Texas, where I'm building an e-transit van to travel in. A couple months ago, we were living in New Haven, Connecticut, and I moved back here so that I can start this lifestyle pretty much. So I've been dreaming about van life for many years, like 3 or 4 years, and recently I started the journey of trying to find a camper van for myself, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'm going to share my experiences and talk about why it's so hard to buy a camper van these days. Now, apart from the obvious, like the market is competitive, I'm going to go and talk through my experiences and give my opinions about why it's so hard to find a camper van. Few caveats for this video are that I'm only speaking from my own personal experience, and I do work full-time. I work in tech. I consider myself to be very privileged in that way, also anti-capitalist, very socially aware, and I'm also a queer person. So if those values or things mean anything to you, that's great. I also have to say that I acknowledge that there's many different forms of van life, and like I said, I'm only speaking from my experience, which is pretty privileged. I think of van life as something that's in the cost alone is comparable to living in an apartment. You know, this lifestyle to me represents not only a form of freedom, but a form of resistance and a way to make positive change in society. Haven't figured out exactly how that's going to work, but that's something that I'm figuring out now. The first thing that I want to share was to talk about how I started to really think about the camper van I wanted to buy. It had to do with my financial situation. Of course, everyone knows that this lifestyle is very popular nowadays. It can be very expensive. And so I have to go back a few years to give you the story about how I got to this point. So in 2019 is when I got into tech. And in this year, I did a coding boot camp and graduated and got my first real adult job. Before that, I was a struggling artist. And so I began to experience financial independence and freedom and stability and joy. And I was really excited about that, of course. And I was living at my mom's, so I was moving out of my mom's house at that time and trying to figure out how I wanted to live and things like that. So I was really into van life, and one day I found a van on like Facebook Marketplace or something, and I thought it was really cool and a great deal, so I bought it, and it wasn't even running. So I bought it and towed it to a car shop or something. I spent a couple grand getting it running, and then it was sitting in my dad's driveway for a few months. I never really was fully committed to van life, or I was scared, or kind of just wasn't the right time or situation for me. So after I bought that van, I always kind of regretted that I didn't do anything with it. I ended up selling it to somebody else, and so it was still on my mind. A few years passed, and of course, very interesting and challenging few years from 2020 to the present day. And I began my car search earlier this year, pretty much. In short, the four main reasons that I'm going to go over are, first of all, the obvious one is that the used car market is very competitive. Also, it's very hard to understand and know what your personal requirements are in a camper van, and that has to do with the third reason, which is that there's so much knowledge that you have to gain in order to have a good sense of knowledge and value of camper vans. And then lastly is that the whole idea of buying a camper van is also closely related to buying into the van life lifestyle. Now, whether or not you're going to live part-time or full-time, I don't think it really matters. You're still kind of keyed into a certain type of alternative lifestyle, and you're really interested in that. And I think that's honestly the biggest hurdle and issue. The most challenging thing about buying a camper van is like committing to the idea of changing your lifestyle, sometimes very dramatically. So I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. So I told that story earlier about the van that I bought that I never did anything with, to shed light on my last reason there, which is that the process of buying a camper van is hard because you're also kind of changing or shifting into a totally new lifestyle, which is very scary and challenging. Like, what I did in my experience was, earlier in the year, my lease was ending pretty soon. So around January, February, March, I was kind of shopping for camper vans and thinking about whether or not I could really do this. And it's a very scary thing to go through, but eventually I just decided it would be worth trying it out. So I went through the whole process of like getting rid of a lot of my stuff, thinking about what material things really mean or what value they actually give to us. Like I said, like the lifestyle is what leads, I think, the decisions. In my case, at least. The next thing is that the whole process of buying camper van, there's so much knowledge that you really need to absorb. There's, the car part of the equation, which is, if you don't know much about cars, that's a lot to understand, figure out. But then on top of that, you have all the recreational vehicle type of components, whether like solar, plumbing, or electrical systems. You have to learn all of that on top of that. So it just makes it that much more harder to start learning about it. So that's what makes it tricky too. You also have to, apart from like the objective knowledge about the camper vans itself, you have to start putting together, like pieces of a puzzle, what your requirements and preferences are. So you might want like a little minivan or something, or you might believe you need like plumbing and a toilet and shower. Whatever it might be, you have to go through the process of learning and sorting out what you personally would need in a camper van. So that's why a lot of people tend to build their own, which is of course cost effective, but also it's opportunity to build what's suitable for you. And then on top of everything else was the more like obvious reasons about the competitiveness of the market. That's in part because of the pandemic, but also I think camper vans, they're just so popular these days. There was, I think, 2 or 3 vans in total that I actually saw in person. One of them I really, really wanted to buy, but it was sold to someone else before I can even go see it. So that was kind of a bummer for a while. But ultimately, I was able to learn a great deal about camper vans. I don't know everything. I had to learn about all the different components and like a rough estimate of what their value is. After seeing a couple of used vans, and also after having the experience with the old camper van that didn't run, but I fixed it up, the camper van that I never traveled in, I knew that one of the top things I wanted was a really, really mechanically sound, mechanically solid van. After experiencing having that one camper van sold before I can see it, I felt pretty discouraged. So I thought maybe buying something new would be more favorable for myself in the long term, like talking 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So ultimately, I was being a little bit opportunistic when I decided to buy the e-transit van. It was a very expensive purchase, probably the most expensive thing I've ever bought, but obviously I didn't buy it outright, and I think it's going to be worth it because in my mind I compare that purchase to buying a house, and that's the reality of my present situation. Like, I could have bought a house or tried out van life, and I guess I'm just gonna see where it takes me from now. Yeah, so that's it. In summary, the used market is very competitive, especially for camper vans. 2 is that it takes a great deal of knowledge and time to figure out what you need for yourself. 3 is learning all the camper van specs, like not only the vehicles, but the camping part or the other systems in camper vans. And lastly, the kind of barrier to entry in the van life lifestyle, which is a component or like very mixed into the whole process of buying a camper van. So yeah, I think that's it. Bye.